Welcome. My name is Dan Smith, and today we're going to talk with Rob Talbot, the Executive Director of Josiah White's Quakerdale Foundation. Welcome, Rob, and thank you for joining me.
Oh, great. It's great to be here. Thanks.
Now, Josiah White's Quakerdale Foundation has a rich tradition that most of our listeners are not going to be familiar with. Who was this Josiah White?
Well, Josiah White ended up being a Philadelphia philanthropist. He started out when he was a kid. His father was killed in an accident, and so he knew what it was like growing up without a father. And at the time that he was living, truthfully, the life expectancy of people was very low. It was actually age 38 that people was the mortality rate. And so what was happening in large cities, there wasn't many. There was Philadelphia and New York City. There was just a lot of kids running the streets. Not only was the life expectancy short, but they lit their houses by fire. I mean, there's just a lot of danger that we don't have to deal with now at this point in time. But there was just a lot of kids that were running the streets. They were not healthy. They were also causing a lot of problems that kids can do when they're young running the streets. So it was his desire that he would create an organization or a way that kids could learn the Quaker way, which is to learn about God and to learn work skills. And so what happened for him was he became an apprentice in a hardware store. Sorry, wow. He was an apprentice in a hardware store, and ultimately became the owner of the store. Became very wealthy and very successful, and did accomplish a lot of great things, neat things out in the Philadelphia area. And so when he passed away, he left it in his will that he'd like to have a place on each side of the Mississippi where they would buy a piece of land on each side of the Mississippi. And Quakers would go live there, and they would bring some of these kids into their own homes and support them.
So he was a man who had been orphaned, got into business, did really, really well with business, and as a result, God put a passion in his heart for kids that were just like him and wanted to intentionally do something that would benefit. So I'm guessing that that's how this Quakerdale part of the organization started. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So through time, we need to remember this was 1851 when the trust was established after Josiah passed away. It was 1851. And, a lot of times I'll say, that's before Lincoln was president. That's a long time ago. And what even more happened in the 60s was that the life expectancy dropped by 10 years to 28 years due to the Civil War. And so again, these kids, and they were putting them on orphan trains. They called them the orphan trains and sent them out west, and hopefully somebody would take them in, basically, is the way it was. And so lots of ways that kids were helped, but probably starting in the late 50s and 60s, Quakerdale became one of the largest organizations in the state of Iowa. And our sister organization, White's Residential Family Services in Indiana, is as well one of the largest organizations in the state of Indiana. That's the other side of the Mississippi. So they basically, these two organizations, they responded to the need. And in the 60s and 70s was residential care, residential treatment, where kids would come in and they live with a house parent couple. And they would, learn about God and learn work skills and learn how to get a good education, and then they'd move out. And so our most recent, when we move into the up and through around 2016, where that really all changed, that's what we were doing. We were helping kids in residential care with house parents, dorm leaders, and then shift staff, where we would help kids grow and fulfill Josiah White's goals.
Okay. So 1851 then is when Quakerdale got started. And was it always in the New Providence area, or where?
No. Again, Quakers were actually early pioneers. So that's why they ended up in Indiana. That was a big stopping point as the pioneers moved out. And then they got across the Mississippi. That was the goal. And that's where ultimately the Iowa Quaker Church started. Salem, Iowa was the first starting point south of Mount Pleasant,
Okay.
where the land was bought. And that's where it started.
And then, so started out orphanage in Salem, Iowa, and then moved to New Providence. Time frame roughly
Around 1960 there was a great group of Quakers that were in the New Providence area, which is near Eldora, south of Iowa Falls, and that group was very interested in supporting this type of ministry, and it was the middle of the state. So when it started, the state wasn't formed, but New Providence was right in the center of the state. And so that was the reason why they decided that they would kind of move it there. The other reason was it had burned down. The orphanage had burned down for the second time. Same situation, heating and everything with fire and lighting things with fire. So.
Interesting. So roughly the 60s moved to New Providence, and then somewhere during that period of time then started working with the state in addition to the orphanage, or is that a transition that happened?
Right. It switched. We were the first training school for boys. We were the first training school for girls in the state. We were actually a school for Indian children through different, political times that happened. We've just been kind of always ready to serve. And so whatever was needed, that's the way we moved was, okay, well, you need this, we'll see what we can do. And that's the way it worked. And starting around in the 60s is when the real residential, it moved from maybe a normal orphanage to really moved into contracts with the state. And we were kind of a pioneer in all that stuff to help learn how to do more than just the old family house parent style, but now how do we provide treatment, therapy services, all those types of things.
Sure. So originally when Josiah White was thinking about this concept, there really wasn't anything like a state agency like the Department of Human Services or any of these kind of things that were going on. So the only mechanism to really help care for these orphans was an orphanage. In the move to New Providence, then it became, as well as a transition, that there were now state programs that could help what we call today, I think, at-risk kids. Then you were able to kind of do the same sort of work, but just with those that were being identified by the state of Iowa as really needing some help. And of course, you couldn't turn your back on that and responded to it. And so that started the relationship with the state. So tell us a little bit about the transition then to a foundation. What happened, or what were the series of things that motivated you to move from continuing to do those kind of services to the state of Iowa to now becoming a foundation?
Well, the state of Iowa, like all other states, they make choices on how they're going to take care of kids and families. And I'll try hard not to get on my soapbox here, but one of them is that the church believers have really, through time, the way we started was people were helped through the church, and the church is called to help widows and orphans. And so that's the way it started. That was probably the biblical approach. Through time, then obviously the state got more and more involved, and the church got less involved. And they basically said, if the state's going to pay you, we're not going to give you as much support. You're going to, and so that exchange has been an interesting and difficult thing, truthfully. And I wish it was reversed back to just being the state helping widows and orphans, and the church is helping widows and orphans, not the state, because that's the way I think it works best. So what happened is, you get these large bureaucracies in the Department of Family and Children Services, one of the largest budgets in the state of Iowa. And so that means that it gets moved around like a political issue. And at that point in time in 2016, the state had decided they were going to do it all differently. And without going into the details of it, our board decided that the approach that the state was taking was essentially going to take away our mission. It was going to cause us to be dedicated to whatever they told us to do. Our existence would be dependent upon if they told us and if we followed their instructions, versus we've got a mission. We're going to help kids and families like Josiah White, put in his trust and his will. And so we made a decision at that point in time. We will no longer do the things that we've always done since the 60s and done well based on the choices of the state. And the big decision there was, we're not going to do residential anymore. We're going to do ministries that are separate from the state. And that was the precursor. Then there was the strategic issue that the things of our world today are very litigious, and the issues of working with people means that you're always at risk to be sued. And we needed to deal with the fact of our world. And in that process, at that same time around 2016 into 2017, the board decided that we're going to form a foundation to protect the assets of the foundation, so that if a car accident or just a staff makes a bad choice in one of these programs, everything will not be lost. It will not all be shut down forever. I mean, truthfully, one lawsuit could just eliminate the whole mission that started back in 1851. So we decided to develop a foundation that would hold all the assets, but would not do any programs. And then we would partner with organizations who do help children learn about God and learn about work skills and having a healthy life. And we would take the assets of the foundation and help those organizations be successful.
Okay. So it sounds like Quakerdale has a unique ability to take a look at what's going on around them, then examining the mission and staying right onto that mission. It sounds like that hasn't changed since Josiah White envisioned it way back in the mid 1800s. But then being able to modify the way that you do ministry so that you can continue to fulfill that mission and maybe even expand with what you're doing. So the transition from orphanage to New Providence to residential treatment and now to this foundation was all geared towards making sure that we fulfill the mission that was given to us by Josiah White way back in the 1800s, it sounds like.
Yeah. So we all know that there's needs for kids and families. There's all kinds of needs, but the style of service that they need is very dependent upon our culture and what's happening. And, the way we've always operated before I was ever around or anybody on the board was ever around was we respond to the needs and the opportunities that sit in front of us. And what has been really hard in this transition is that so many people who are involved with us love the old things that we used to do, which were great. I love them too. It's why I came to work at Quakerdale. Residential care, bringing these kids in, helping them, know the Lord and grow and become great parts of our community. But based on the culture and how things work today, that's just not possible anymore. So we make those adjustments, just like we've done, for 170 or more years. We've had to make those changes.
So it's easy for me to understand how an orphanage is meeting the needs of kids and families. Again, it's easy to understand through residential treatment programs with the state, how that's happening. It might be a little bit more of a stretch to try to understand how a foundation's doing that. So can you give us a little insight in terms of how you're accomplishing the mission and give us maybe some examples of what you're doing now that are helping you fulfill that mission?
Sure. Yeah. It's an ever evolving process. I mean, not unlike it has happened through history where we've evolved and we've adapted. But since the foundation wants to provide what we call a firewall or protection for the assets, it's very important that we don't do programs, but what we do is we come alongside people who have a heart mission that matches the intent of Josiah White's trust and will, as well as our board. And we are very committed to doing that. Some examples: we have a great campus in Waterloo, and it is a block in size, a square city block in size. Many buildings there. Well, when we shut things down, a pastor talked to a lady who was in his church who was doing a daycare. She had a daycare that was in a house. The roof was literally leaking and caving in, but she was providing daycare services for kids. And she was in a part of Waterloo's kind of rough, and a part of Waterloo where she really had a ministry for these young moms who were a lot like she happened to her. And she wanted to minister to these young moms who, even when their kids have trouble, they can't leave work. If we want them to be successful, they couldn't leave work because they kind of had hourly types of jobs. They have hourly types of jobs. So this lady would, if the kid was, a family member was, older brother or sister was in school and they were in trouble, this lady would go to school and advocate on behalf of the mom who was at work. She would transport the kids to, often pick them up or get them to school, all these different types of things that she would do to be of service to these young men. Women. She just really had a heart for these women and their kids. Well, she was helping about 12 a week in that ministry. Well, she was able to move on to that campus that used to be doing residential care. And within a year, she was working with over 120 kids a week. Wow. And that's only a couple buildings on this campus. And now she works with over 175 kids a week, a 24-hour a day daycare. During the summer, she does camps for older kids who are normally in school. And it's just her heart. And so we partner with her, not only in helping her get set up, but then providing a place for her to operate. So that's a really exciting one. There's lots of others that, as you see on our website, you can learn about them. But that's a pretty fun one to talk about, because that whole campus, when we did residential care, was working with about 40 kids. When it was fully packed, it was working with about 40 kids on the campus. And then, of course, we probably would work with, 50 other kids in counseling around town.
And now it's 175 plus, and more than just I believe more than just that organization is there at that campus too, right? There's several other.
Yeah, there's other organizations. There's a lot more kids being helped on that campus than were ever helped when we were doing the services that we were doing on that campus.
Well, it sounds to me that by moving to a foundation and supporting the work of other people, you're actually exponentially increasing the impact that you're having in those areas, both in Waterloo and New Providence, compared to what it was when you made the decision in 2016 to change.
Yeah, that's the way it's working out. And I think it's really hard to go through change, but I think we're called to do that. I think we're called to realize that if a door closes, then we're going to go find another open door. And that's really what happened when the state back in 2016 said they're going to change how they're going to do everything. And they truthfully were going to take over our whole mission. And I think we're not exactly sure how this is all going to happen, because Quakerdale's evolved for, decades. But we really are excited about what we're seeing, and we're seeing it grow and change as we move through this change.
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. I've heard you use a key word a couple times in here when you talk about the relationship between the foundation and some of the other ministries that or organizations that you support. I believe you use the word partner or partnership.
Right.
looking at the time right now, we're not going to have time to talk about that in the detail that I think it deserves. So if you don't mind, let's go ahead and wrap this session up. And would you be willing to come back next week and talk more specifically about what it means to be a ministry partner and the services that are available to those partners through the foundation? Can we do that next week?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks for doing that. Hey, if you've got any questions or you'd like to learn more about the Quakerdale Foundation, their contact information is on the screen right here, or you can look at the description of any of these recordings and get a hold of them. Rob, thank you. I look forward to our continued conversation next week, and thank you for joining me today. Let's get out there and let's serve as Christ serves.